Welcome to Different Voices. I'm Dr. Luz Maria.
I'm Lisa Frank.
And today's topic is the Me Too movement, sexual abuse, and domestic violence.
And guys, don't feel like you have to tune us out. Stay tuned because this is going to be interesting. It's going to be informative, and it'll surely give you some information on how to possibly interact with women after all this Me Too movement has come about and not consider yourself to be in violation. As well as you might have someone that you're intimate with and who you don't understand what this crossroad is, why they're having a difficulty time connecting to you. And so we're here to inform you, I'm here to become more informed because Dr. Luce is an expert in this area.
Yeah, so today's topic is, I'm so glad, Lisa, you mentioned inviting the man, because as you can see, the Me Too movement really is a birth to what occurred with both men and women. And if we really start acknowledging historically what has happened, let's look at the Me Too movement. You know, it started in 2006. And I want to start with that because it started with Tamara Berkey. She's a black woman in New York that started, and it wasn't very much heard until Hollywood hits it in 2017, Lisa.
Right. And often that's the case, as with the AIDS and HIV epidemic. It didn't really get recognition and notoriety until began to hit Hollywood. And then at that point, you know, we there was a race to finding a cure.
And it's so important because it is we need to acknowledge that, like we talk about AIDS and we talk about the Me Too movement, it has to happen in the hierarchies, which has been happening all the time. But I'm so glad, you know, that it finally got open because now it has become a global movement, not just a local movement. Thank you, Tamara Berkey.
Yes, thanks to her, because women have been struggling for so long. I mean, we can go back as far as slave trading, how we were, my culture, we were brought here and we were, as females, our spouses were ripped away from us, children sold to other people, and then we were at the beck and call of that household, including a sexual partner for the man of that house.
And as you can see historically what has happened here, as Lisa has shared, and then even in our culture, Latino culture in Mexico, we've had so many women in the northern part of Mexico that actually would get raped and they would get buried, killed and buried. And there's been a huge movement as well as in Mexico. So this Me Too movement, it reached globally because it reached Hollywood.
And another culture that we can bring into this, currently they're having a lot of issues with the Haitian population.
Yes.
Because in their culture, they're being raped periodically on a regular basis to the point where they began having classes to teach the young girls how to defend themselves. So this is it's not a new subject.
Yes.
It's not a new issue, and it's gone way back, but nonetheless it still needs to be addressed, and we are facing it.
We are, and you know, it is finally the collective unconscious is allowing ourselves to really reach these levels. And what I truly believe, it really needs to have the men as well in this conversation. That's why, you know, I said, let's invite them.
Yes. A lot of men haven't been taught no means no.
So true. So let's look a little bit in this conversation. I mean, you know, have you heard of, you know, any women friends, your work that you do also with the sexual abuse? I know with the work that you with alcohol abuse, there's got to be lots of women that end up in that space because of the sexual abuse and the domestic violence.
Yes, I'm familiar also personally with domestic violence because I experienced that in my marriage, and I was, after 3 months, slapped in the face, and I said, "Oh boy, this is not going to work," and it didn't. Okay, it didn't work for me, but in the professional space as an addictions counselor, I had the uh, pleasure of facilitating the incest rape group, and it was my first my first position out of the gate into the field, and it was challenging. In that women, when someone is violated, where sex is concerned, it takes every part of your body to engage. And so this one young lady, whenever she shared her incest experience with a family member, like her whole body shook, and so did the whole room.
And I'm going to go back to something you shared, and it's not to dwell too much into what you shared in your own personal life.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that is really important here, you are an educated woman, a powerful woman, and in that space, you still, there's that domestic violence. And I think that itself is really what occurs, for a lot of women. They could be in very high positions, and domestic violence occurs.
Yes, and through it shows, as we say with addiction, it has no respect of person. There's no culture that is specific to. There's no race. There's even gender, because men are violated. Men are abused too. Men are violated, raped as well. Whether it be in prison or wherever, they experience it as well. And so we all have to come up with ways that we're going, and know that you can work through it, because we're not what happened to us. We do have an opportunity to overcome.
And yes, and something, and I'm going to even add a little bit to what you said about men. Men actually also get abused by women.
Right.
We do see that, but that is such a hush hush in our society, because how dare, would a man actually call the police or make a mention of anything? And it's like other men would say, who do you think, you're little something, or you should say something. So they just keep that as a hush hush. So this is also a call to action and a conversation to include that I am aware, my partner's aware, and anybody in our field knows that we are aware there's a lot of men, and it's not because they're weak. A lot of these men is because they are so afraid and see the woman to be so tender at times that they do not dare to raise their hand.
Yeah, they're taught not to hit a woman, but they are not taught what to do if the woman hits you, right? And it's a huge problem. Unfortunately, we get into the space of relationships and we bring all of our trauma. It's two worlds colliding. And unfortunately, some things aren't resolved, and you probably shouldn't be in a space of a relationship because of your trauma, but we do. So because we do, that's why we're here talking about this today.
Yeah, Me Too movement. And it's, if we look back historically, and again, like what you shared with the African American culture, or even the European culture, in the European time, it was accepted that a man could actually hit his wife as long as the belt was not wider than 2 inches. So this historically
the
has
system.
Yeah, it's a system that has been perpetuated again and again and again. So it is time to change this. So how are we going to do this, Lisa, together between men and women? I think that is a conversation. I think maybe we should start a little like digging in.
Well, I think it first comes down to admitting that that something happened to you that you felt was beyond your control, and what you're going to do about it. Some women are in a space where, of course, fortunately, we have shelters, and they can escape their abusers. Often, when it's found out that a man is being abused, it's usually in the space of there's been a disturbance, someone calls the police, and when the police gets there, the woman hasn't calmed down, so she's still hitting. And I know of someone who was in that situation and ended up, being both of them being taken down to the police precinct because she wouldn't stop hitting him, right? And the police told her, he said, and I appreciated that, because sometimes as women we feel like, oh, everybody should be on our side because we're the weaker, but sometimes we're the perpetrators. Sometimes we're just taking out our anger and our frustration on that other person, and so they need protection too. And it's fair for the police officer. I was really surprised to say, no, you need to stop hitting him, and if you don't, you're going to go to the police precinct also. And she didn't stop, so they brought both of them down, and that's how I got made aware of.
And like the police should have not even giving her an option. The police should have just taken her in. And it's just the same thing with the male counterparts. And so as we are looking into this topic of sexual abuse and this domestic violence that occurs both men and women, and it starts so early on with children. When our fathers hit their mothers, that is teaching a behavior.
Right.
So it's so important that itself, that's what first place to stop.
That's right. That's right. I heard I don't want to mention the name, but a celebrity, and his wife was talking about being abused by him, and I remember she said one day he said something really harsh to her, and the daughter was present, and the daughter said to him, "Why are you so mean to my mom?" And the daughter at the time was about maybe 14 years old, and she said that when she came away from the situation, she thought to herself, if I continue to allow this, when my daughter grows older, if she gets in a relationship that's abusive, I can't even tell her to walk away, because the first thing she's going to say was, "Ma, you tolerated it. So why are you asking me to do something different?" And she said that's the conversation she had with herself that forced her to move on from the relationship.
And women get stuck in this cycle, this trap, as to why they end up staying in this relationships. And I can talk about whether even families, and I'm not going to give names, or even so many cases that they are so trapped in a cycle they do not know. And because this cycle has this place where there's the abuse, and then right after the abuse is a stage where he says, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that. And I promise you I am not going to do that. And then after he says that, then blames her. But if you have not done that, I would have never done that to you. So what it does, it kind of, for the woman, calms her down for a moment. And then little by little, it starts to escalate the circumstances, the situation, until, again, the woman eventually starts pressuring a situation, because she's actually waiting for the abuse to happen, for the actual, hitting, and that wait time of it to happen is so overwhelming for the woman. So she prefers to create sometimes a chaos. So it happens, and she can finally let her nervous system to calm down. So it is this cycle that it is trapped, and women do not know how to get out.
Yep, that cycle abuse is it's interesting process. It's an interesting prospect to take a look at, because during that honeymoon phase, when things are good, you're kind of hoping also that it won't happen again, and he's promising you and giving you flowers and those kind of things. And so you feel okay, well, he's really sorry, we can just kind of move on until crisis comes and it happens again, right?
And it'll continue.
Yeah.
And they go in that for years.
Yeah.
Those cycles can actually continue for years, creating the damage. And then we go into even the sexual abuse.
Yes.
That is such a difficult topic.
Talk about it.
Yeah. It is so hard, ladies. It is so hard, men, to talk about that. The trauma. And it is so confusing, because how does one explain um, that someone that loves you, like your father, your
Yes.
stepfather,
Yes.
abuses you?
Yes. Yes.
It is such a complicated phenomena where they feel they have the right to touch and abuse a boy or a girl.
It's very painful.
It is really painful.
And, growing up, I received a lot of messages from my mom growing up, and just didn't have a positive outlook on men when it came to um, intimacy. She never referred to men in a positive light, and she lost her mother at 18. She was the second oldest, and I never understood. She was just men are dogs and things like that, and it's like, okay, but my dad's a man and my brother's a man, and I never understood it. And she'd do things like, I remember being a teenager and I wanted this nightie that came up to my knees, above my knees, and I had to beg her, beg her for it. And finally, she gave in, and she said, "Okay, you can get it, but as soon as you wake up in the morning, you have to get dressed." And so I said, "Okay." And but then I just never understood her prospect on it. And so my aunt, who is her youngest sister, there was a movie that came out about sexual abuse, especially in family, and it's usually in a familiar space with family members or someone who's groomed you, right? And my aunt shared how a family member, because their mother died when my mom was 18, but she was a baby, and she shared about how a family member sexually assaulted them, on a continuous basis. And my mom, was asked if it happened to her, and there was an attempt. And so in this space, in the professional space, we consider an attempt to be the act
The act
actually
itself.
performed. And so this is where she got all of this concept and her perspective about men and sexuality from. And I remember being in therapy at the time, and I went to my therapist after learning that. My heart was hurting. I was like in tears for all of them, that I couldn't get my mom to talk about what to do if something happened to her and she died. I couldn't get her to talk about that, and I realized that she didn't want to talk about that because she felt like if she ever left us, we'd be in a vulnerable place,
Yeah.
and things like that could happen to us as well. And she didn't want that, so she wouldn't talk about it. And she's from a generation that didn't believe in counseling, so she didn't get what she needed. So now I'm hurting for her too, and her sisters, that they could have been better. They could have gotten better. They could have, worked through it, but they were just not believers of therapy. They thought, oh, therapist's just going to tell your business. And
Yeah.
so and then I think back to the times when I looked in my mom's eyes, and I could see the sadness, and I
Yes.
could see the pain. And then, she married a man who was, not always, faithful. And that just
Just
further,
added,
yeah,
yeah, added to that.
yeah.
Thank you so much for your vulnerability, Lisa. I just want to acknowledge you that, and I can sense the pain, and I hear that all the time. Like your mother protecting you, and at the same time talking bad about men. And is how does one create relationships from that? How hard must it have been for you?
And I get it. I understand. Sometimes, I sometimes people don't set out to be a molester. Sometimes I believe that because I've taught my children, I have a daughter, I have a son, I have a granddaughter, and I've taught them, appropriate touch, right?
Yes.
Because sometimes we don't understand what touch can do. And I may just go to you, up to you, and try to give you a brotherly or a sisterly hug or kiss. And in that space,
Yes.
it's something, you feel something.
You trigger.
That you don't know was going to happen. And it ends up, oh, wow, that felt good when that child sat on my lap or hugged me or whatever. And the next thing you know, you're in this cycle of sexual abuse that you didn't even plan or think about ahead of time, right? So I've taught my daughter and my, even my granddaughter's interaction with my son. There was a time, he's very tall, he's 6'5", so when she was little, there was a time when she would want to horseplay with him and she'd be hitting him in areas that I felt was not appropriate. So I explained to her, I said, this space is private. You don't touch this space. If you want to wrestle with him, you can hit him in his chest, arms, whatever, but not there, yeah. Right? And I also taught them, not to sit on men's laps. You don't need to do that. If they want to greet you, you don't need to do that.
And, as I'm hearing your story, you've said a couple of things, like the first part when you went back and you said your mother knew that wearing a nightie, and there was nothing wrong about it, but in protecting you. And there is this paradox of information that your mother is giving you. On one hand says yes, and then the other hand says no. So our nervous system starts listening that there must something be wrong with that. And just trying to figure out your mother as to why she is saying that.